He says, "As for me, I came close to stumbling. My feet had almost slipped, for I was filled with envy of the proud when I saw how the wicked prosper." And what he's talking about is a person, this feet almost slipped. He's referring to moral, not a physical thing. And what was drawing him was the idea of seeing the success of people who are unworthy, and in the world, a lot of people. That is, if you remember, that rabbi wrote the book, Why Good Things Happen to Bad People and Bad Things Happen to Good People and stuff. St. Augustine says that that is the great question of evil in the world, that you constantly look at it, that, things, I guess I would put it bluntly, things don't work out as I know they should. Okay, so we see this, but I've always been fascinated with the way St. Augustine explains it. I'm not sure I agree with him, but I think it's a fascinating way to look at it. St. Augustine says that in every person's life, there is good and there is evil. He says, and the best person in the world, there's some evil. The worst person, there's some good. And God, being just, will reward all good. And God, being just, will punish all evil. And the fact of the matter is, at the end of our lives, you and I, hopefully as good people, will enter heaven. So if he wants to punish us, he has to get it over with on earth. On the other hand, if I'm a person who is destined for hell, he has to get my rewards over with on earth. There's no reward there. Now, that's the way St. Augustine looks at it. Isn't that fascinating? I can't say I totally agree with it, but it's something that I guess I should say bothers me, but I find it interesting. He says, for them, there are no pains. Their bodies are sound and sleek. And again, that's a really fascinating thing. That when we look at other people, we never see the difficulties other people are going through. And they look sometimes as though they have no problems at all. And that just isn't true of anybody. It's never been true, never will be true. But he says they seem to be doing so well, and they are the people who are at odds with belief. He says they do not share in people's burdens. They are not stricken like others. Again, I would say that you should counsel some of them. You find out the situation that a lot of people are in, particularly, I don't know if you're familiar with American history, but one of the things I find fascinating in American history, there was a certain point in history where there are a lot of very wealthy people in conjunction with one another, the Morgans, the Fords, Edison, all that. And they literally looted the entire country. And people were in many ways enslaved to them or out of work. And they worked together as a group. Firestone was one of them. But they worked together as a group to do this in the whole country. But it's fascinating to watch what went on. Like, for instance, I forget the guy who built the library in San Luis Obispo. Who is it? Corn? I can't hear more than one are answering. But anyway, whoever he is, the gentleman, what he did was eventually dissipate almost all his money in these libraries. He put actually all over the world, but he put them out there, and that actually was a conscience thing. I told you about Al Capone, but it's interesting to see when it suddenly hits them what they've done. But everything looked as though it was just wonderful. And someone like Hearst, who I think inherited most of what he had, But someone like Hearst, that I think many of you may have visited Hearst Castle, but Hearst Castle is one of 8 that he's given to the different states. But the 3 most magnificent ones are still in his family. But, you know, we see, and why did he give them to the state? It's because the state owns it in increments over a period of time. And he and his company are probably not going to pay taxes for 1,000 years, you know, the way, but you see these people, you know, playing these games, and it seems as though somehow they don't suffer at all, but that is not true. Everyone has a conscience, no matter how you try and bury it or whatever, and the conscience will constantly knock at the door. They wear their pride like a necklace. We all know who that is, and we won't discuss him. They clothe themselves with violence. And this clothing with violence means they protect themselves with violence. And again, they're powerful enough to do almost anything. I've mentioned to some of you, I guess, at table, but I was in the Philippines. I was invited to speak to a small group of Catholics, and extremely wealthy. And they are people who do a lot of good. Okay, if you go to the Philippines, you're either insanely wealthy or you have nothing. There is no middle ground at all. And but I was staying with one of the really wealthy people. He's the man in charge of all the ports in the Philippines. So we would, at lunch, sometimes there'd be a Supreme Court judge. Once there was the president. I mean, it was just a casual thing where they lived and everything. But it was very interesting. If anyone left the house, this happened automatically. So I'm just talking about when I left. If I stepped out the front door, immediately in front, there was a Cadillac Escalade. And you get in, and as you leave, there's one in front of you and one behind you. You stop at no stop signs and no lights, and they go through. And I told him he owned 4 houses at different beaches, and I really wanted to stay some time at one of the beaches. He said, you can go stay at any one you want, but only one night, and then you must leave. Because he says, by that time, they'll know you're an American, they'll know you're connected to me, and you will be kidnapped. It's just that simple. But you see, you know, on one side, it looks so good. And on the other side, it's very uncomfortable. You know, it's a strange thing. It's hard to imagine anything that you could possibly want that wasn't in the house and would be brought to you by servants. You didn't even need to get out of bed. But leaving the house was dangerous. And in a sense, you're in a prison, a very nice prison, but a prison nonetheless, okay? Much like the Jews in Egypt, we had cucumbers all over the place, you know? So anyway, he said they clothe themselves with violence. With folds of fat, their eyes protrude. With imagination, their hearts overflow. And this with imagination, their hearts overflow. It's really fascinating what people choose to do with money. I think one of the most interesting things today is to look at Dubai. But outside that, just watch, you know, the way people deal with money. It's a fascinating thing. Some people can do unbelievable good with their money. And oftentimes they are not public about it. I think they should be more public when people do a lot of that stuff. Hopefully it would inspire other people to do that with their money too. But oftentimes they end up doing nothing but building monuments to themselves and their name very prominently upon it. They scoff, they speak with malice. From on high, they threaten oppression. They have their mouths in the heavens, and their tongues are roaming the earth. So the people turn to them, and they drink in all their words. And what he's getting at here now is that people of influence like this are often very influential. And we look at sort of the wealth they have, we look at the comfort they live in, we look at the conveniences they have, and all of those are really desirable. And the sad thing is then we believe them when they say how they got it. And that usually is not true. They write great books on being wealthy, which oftentimes makes them wealthier. But the thing is, acquiring that much at a time is always a price other people pay. If that much is acquired anywhere, it's a price other people pay. And they say, how can God know? Does the Most High have any knowledge? And the thing is, I think when at a certain point, you need to step away from belief in God, in these sort of things, because belief in God entails justice and judgment, and they need to move away. It was one of the things that I find fascinating about Germany under Hitler. When Germany was under Hitler, they developed a whole new religion, and it was sort of a refinement of the Teutonic past, and they developed it and everything. But the fact is, there was a need for religion. I think you know that most of the people involved in the whole Hitler thing were either Lutheran or Catholic, and because that's basically what Germany was at the time. But they developed this specific religion for them, where the things that you and I are committed to are really not involved at all. I think one of the fascinating things was the way that they would use science in their particular religion type thing. They really use Darwinism. It's Darwin believed the survival of the fittest. I don't know whether you study paleontology or not, but that's no longer held. If you look at history, it's the survival of the adaptable. It's the ability to change that causes survival, not this, fittest or strongest. But on that survival of the fittest was one of the very things that brought about the beginning of the death camps. Why wait for them to die off? We can get rid of them. We know what's supposed to happen. So I think, the first death camp in Germany was built for people who were really elderly and for people who had mental problems and stuff like that. But as soon as you start, getting rid of people you don't like, that very quickly mushrooms, no matter what it is. And so, but they come to this idea that either God doesn't know, which is what the Jews sort of saw of it, but I think most of them create their new God. And whether it's what money can become a God, they just create a new God, and they're very independent of things that just naturally bother us. I think that we all try and lead, I will say, good lives, and we're embarrassed in places where they aren't good lives. So like if you or I accidentally, yell at someone or get mad at someone or something, we're always embarrassed by that. It's amazing to me what doesn't embarrass these crazy rich people. Nothing. There's a level of wealth that you actually graduate out of sanity. I don't know what causes it, but it's a transition. He says, look at them. Such are the wicked, ever prosperous, and they grow in wealth. How useless to keep my heart pure and wash my hands in innocence. When I was stricken all day long, suffered punishment with each new morning, then I said, if I should speak like that, I should betray your children's generation. And what he's saying is, as he watches this and as he sees this, he's tempted to question, what it's done for him. I remember hearing a very wealthy man one time in San Francisco speaking to his own daughter. His daughter had gone to work in some third world country, helping in a medical capacity. And I think the reason why they let her come there, I think she brought a lot of money. And so she was able to, but as a matter of fact, while she was caring for the people, it became true and real. She was really dedicated to them. And she caught some kind of disease when she was there and came back. And I just happened to be passing him. I was at a party he was at, but I just happened to be passing him when he was talking to his daughter, and I have no idea what proceeded. But the sentence I heard was, "Look what all your good has gotten you." This whole idea, my wealth has done all this thing for me, and you try and serve people and stuff like that. What happens? You end up sick. That's where it goes. And this whole idea that wealth throws this at people. And a lot of the times they appear to have a lot of things we would like. But he says, I strove to fathom this problem. It's too hard for my mind to understand, until I entered the holy place of God and came to discern their end. And this strive to fathom the problem, I'd like you to know again what I mentioned at the beginning. Remember I said, this is one of the basic problems of human experience. Why do bad people do so well, even though a lot of them don't? It's the ones who are bad and do well that we notice. And why do so many good people suffer so much? And again, good people are both, successful and unsuccessful. But it bothers us when a good person is not successful. So that's what we notice. So it appears to us, rotten people are doing well and good people are not. That's just the way it looks, okay? But he said, how slippery the paths on which you set them. You make them fall to destruction. How suddenly they come to ruin, swept away and destroyed by terrors. And when he's talking about terrors, it has a lot to do with this idea, like I mentioned, about the libraries and things, that there comes a point in life where you need to face two things. And I think early on, people get away with this, but you need to face with the fact your life is going to end. Every life is going to end. You need to come to the realization that your life is going to end. And ultimately, what have you done? And oftentimes, this leads to terrors in their own lives and psychological problems and things like that, where they suffer under the fact of what they could have done and the fact that it's too late to be known in history as anything other than what they are. It's a difficult thing they face. Like a dream one wakes from, O Lord. When you wake, you dismiss them as phantoms. And over a period of time, that again, they see what they have done and what they have brought about in the world, and they themselves wonder, was it worth it? So when my heart grew embittered and I was pierced to the death of my being, actually I was stupid and I did not understand. I was like a beast in your sight. And I think that the thing in human life, I've mentioned this before, but the thing in human life is difficulties are not harmful to us. It's the overcoming of difficulties and dealing with them that actually creates the person. I think it's one of the funny things that no matter who you are, the stories you most enjoy telling about your survival of disasters, no one talks about the good times and how that all works. We talk about our survival of disasters. That's the interesting thing of our lives. The good things are just boring, okay? As for me, I was always in your presence. You were holding me by my right hand. By your counsel, you will guide me, and then you'll lead me to glory. So he says that go through my life, I allow myself to be guided by you, and in the end of my life, then I enter into glory, okay? And he sees this, he says, what else have I in heaven but you? Apart from you, I want nothing on earth. Now, in the types of suffering the individual's gone through and what they're missing and all this sort of thing, it's hard to imagine really that this is a psalm from David. And it's not listed from David because this person obviously is suffering as what their life was. But the ultimate thing when he gets to the end, he says, but actually, I don't want anything else but you. And that's what I had all along. I had you in your counsel. I had you in your care. I had you in the way I went through these things. I had you in your forgiveness. I have you in everlasting life. He says, ultimately, all I really wanted was you. My body, my heart waste away. God is the strength of my heart, and God is my portion forever. This very last line here, God is my portion forever, is used in the ceremony of tonsure, when the very first stage when you enter priesthood is called tonsure. And what you do, the bishop cuts a little bit of hair off the top of your head and off the four sides, because in Rome, the way that, for a long period of history anyway, the way that slaves were identified was their heads were always shaved. At a certain point, they realized there were more slaves than non-enslaved people in Rome, so they forbid the shaving of the head because they didn't want the slaves to know how many slaves there were. So they forbid that. But initially, that's the way it was. So in the church, the ceremony, actually, you become a slave of Almighty God. And then you begin the stages to priesthood. But the first thing, and this idea that God is my portion forever is a commentary on the Jewish priesthood. And I don't know if you are familiar with this, but under Joshua, the Holy Land was divided up, and it's divided according to families by name and all this sort of thing, and was to pass in perpetuity. During the Babylonian captivity, when the people were gone, many of these names disappeared and stuff like that. So it hasn't been able to be carried on, but it was very, very clear at the time. But when he got all finished, the tribe of Levi, which is the tribe from which the priests come, the tribe of Levi was given nothing. They were given no land or anything at all. And the idea is that what they inherited was God. God was to be their inheritance forever. The result of that was a Levi could live absolutely anywhere he wanted, and people would take care of him. They'd provide housing and everything, but he couldn't pass it on to his children, nothing. They owned nothing. And in the end, they had everything. It's one, and I tell you that it's hard to express how that works in priesthood. It is an absolutely remarkable thing. You know, I've never had a lot of money. I've been able to travel everywhere I wanted in the world. In fact, my sister always used to introduce me to people by saying he's been everywhere twice. But the idea is that the types of things I was mentioning to someone, you know, when COVID started, the very first time when the things we were warned about going out and stuff, I received a phone call that day from some woman, and she was in Costco. She said, "What do you need?" And I have received at least 3 calls a week ever since from different people. They just are in Costco. Sometimes I don't even know who it is. The bag of groceries is on the porch, you know. If this ever ends, I have to start buying food again, you know. But the idea is that it's an interesting thing that you really are taken care of. And what do you have? You have God. What else should anyone want? You know, you actually have God. I remember a priest who, a very elderly man, and he was giving the homily for his best friend who had died, another priest. And he said, the remarkable thing is, he says, you live on the face of the earth this life, and when it's all over, you go to everlasting life. What a deal. And then he went on with the Mass. He says, surely those who are far from you perish. You destroy all those who are unfaithful. To be near God is my happiness. I have my hope in the Lord God. I will proclaim your works at the gates of daughter Zion. In Jerusalem, as the city was set up, there were gates. And those of you who've been to Jerusalem know that there's still several of them. And a gate of a city was always named after the destination of the road. So there's a gate in Jerusalem called the Damascus Gate, and the road that leaves there ends in Damascus. There's one called the Jaffa Gate, and the road through that leads to Jaffa, which is modern day Tel Aviv. But these gates would lead that way. And at the gates were people making announcements. There were people begging. That's also where crucifixions took place, at the gate of a city. But anyway, he says, I will stand at the gates and I will always proclaim your works. And I think the thing here, he's talking about praising God, but rather than praising God, what he does is announce what God has done for him and let that praise God. Just announce what God has done for him. And I've mentioned this several times before. I think we have a duty to be aware of that and share that to the way we can, that how we have experienced God, each in our own ways, because that is truly his praise. The next psalm is Psalm 74. Why, O God, have you cast us off forever? Why does your anger blaze at the sheep of your pasture? And probably this one could well have been written during one of the exiles, but the idea that God punishes the Jewish nation for their sins is endemic to the text. We expect, and the Jews expected it, but they complain when it goes on too long, okay? Much like during the Exodus. They figure, you know, we paid our debt, but this thing, have you really cast us off forever? And I mentioned that one of the things to understand in the scriptures is this idea that God is capable of punishing me, but he is not capable of destroying me. God is capable of correcting me, but he is not capable of destroying me. And I mean that he is not capable. He cannot do that. And so as we stand in the presence of God, oftentimes as a punishment goes on, you get the feeling it's not going to end, that this is the attitude, you know, like I'm trying to think, let's say John of the Cross. I don't know how much of you ever studied about the dark night of the soul, but John of the Cross had a very close dialogic relationship with God, that he would talk to God and God would talk to him. And at one point it ended. It totally ended, and ended for a period almost the rest of his life. I think it ended about 6 months. That period ended about 6 months before he died, okay? It was a very, very difficult time for him. And I don't know if you've read much of the writings of Mother Teresa, that was true of the end of her life too. She lost any consolation she had in it. And he received an inspiration after it ended, in which God said to him, he's basically, I wondered if you loved me or the wonderful things you get while loving me. So the wonderful things you get ended. And God said, and you stayed faithful to me. You loved me, not the things, okay? And in mystical theology, that's the purpose of the dark night of the soul, because there's real consolation connected to being in relationship to God through all kinds of things. But to a certain level of holiness, you're gonna have to get over that consolation, okay? Most of us never reach it, thank God. And anyone, he goes on, he says, remember your flock, which you claimed long ago, the tribe you redeemed to be your own possession, this mountain of Zion where you made your dwelling, okay? Remember, you called us, you chose us, you built your home within us. God's home is in the temple. He commanded them to build it, where to build it and everything. So they remember all these things. Turn your step to these places that are utterly ruined after the destruction of the city. The enemy has laid waste the entirety of the holy place. Your foes have made uproar in the midst of your assembly. They've set up their emblems as tokens here. The emblems of the armies, you know, were like totems, and most the emblems of the armies, like the Roman army would be an eagle, but they had some kind of an animal on them. And it was common when the armies took over an area that they would put, you know, the standards in the area where they controlled. But what they didn't realize was, for the Jews, those standards were graven images. And so the Jews would look at the Roman eagle as though it was the statue of a pagan god, okay? Now, the Romans didn't worship the eagle or anything, but the Jews saw it in that way. And I think it's interesting, in some countries, you find like national flags in every church. That's, to me, the same type of thing. It's the national flag in the church. He says, they have wielded their axes on high at the entrance to a grove of trees. And what he's doing, he's not talking about them actually tearing down a grove, because oftentimes groves of trees were in fact pagan places of worship. I mentioned the Germans particularly, they worship trees. But the idea here, they're attacking Jerusalem in that way and destroying things. They've broken down all the carvings. They've struck together with hatchet and pickaxe. Oh God, they've set your holy place on fire. They have raised and profaned the abode of your name. And so what do you call it? The psalm sort of takes a slight turn, and it's, you know, God, it's your home that's been destroyed. It's your temple and we call on God, not that we want anything for ourselves, of course, but we want God to repair his own home and this sort of thing. So they said in their hearts, we will utterly crush them. We will burn every shrine of God in the land. We do not see our emblems, nor is there a prophet. We have no one to tell us how long it will last. So this group has attacked us. They've destroyed us. They've occupied. They continue to tear things down, and we see no sign of God's interest, no sign that God is moving, or even that has sent us a prophet to tell us what to do. And if you look scripturally, one of the things that God says he sends as a punishment when the people turn away from him, the major punishment he sends is that he will no longer speak to them. And so they no longer have the guidance to sort of move out of that, or the guidance to go into a better setting of some kind. So he says, how long, O God, is the enemy to scoff? Is the foe to insult your name forever? Why, O Lord, do you hold back your hand? And why do you keep your right hand hidden under your cloak? And I always think that's really interesting that the Jews are very excited that God isn't punishing the bad people, and they're very depressed when he punishes them, you know? So this idea that we want God to punish, just not us. And we want God to reign, you know, but over us, not them. And this whole us-them thing. He says, yes, God is my king from time past, who bestows salvation through all the land. So he's claiming the, you know, historical, what do you call it, relationship with God. It was you who divided the sea by your might, who shattered the heads of the monsters in the sea. And the idea here is the Exodus and the reference to it. It was you who crushed Leviathan's heads and gave it as food to the beasts of the desert. Leviathan is a mythical creature, and he seems to correspond very much to the thing of the crocodile. And again, I don't know how much time you have ever spent around crocodiles, but there's some very curious things about crocodiles. Crocodiles will periodically clear the liquid in their throats, whatever, and they clear it by, it's like a sneeze, but in the sunlight, it looks like fire. It's little droplets, and that's where the fire-breathing dragon comes from. And so there's a whole bunch of myths connect with this, but it's all under the word Leviathan. And the basic animal is the crocodile, but you'll see Leviathan used in many ways. It was you who opened up springs and torrents. It was you who dried up ever-flowing rivers, okay? So as God was taking the Jews through the desert, remember, he caused them to discover water. Moses struck the rock at one time, but he always provided water as they're going through the desert. The drying up refers to when they reached the Holy Land. I think it was in the reading maybe 2 or 3 days ago, where Joshua stopped the Jordan River. And according to the story, he asked the carriers of the ark to go into the center of the Jordan. And as they walked in, the water flowing from upstream stopped, and the water flowing downstream just continued to flow away, and the Jews crossed through. One of the things that happens in the Bible, whenever there is a major transfer of authority, there is a duplication of a miracle that took place in the authority who is gone that now takes place in the new authority. So Moses split the Reed Sea, Joshua splits the Jordan River, okay? So the power of Moses passed into Joshua, this sort of thing. And if you remember Simon Peter, do you remember when he was imprisoned? Compare that story with the resurrection of Jesus. He's imprisoned with 2 guards that he's chained to. He leaves without opening the door of the prison. He passes through it and he gets out. Jesus leaves while the guards are guarding the tomb, and Jesus is gone before the tomb is emptied, is opened, because one of the passages records the women are there when the quake takes place and the rock moves open, and Jesus is already gone. So what that indicated was the power of Jesus now operating in Peter, okay? And so that's a very, very common thing in the scriptures. He says, yours is the day, yours the night. It was you who established the light and the sun. Now, this idea of establishing light and sun, I don't know if any of you, again, have ever had a chance to live in an area where they have no electricity. But when I was on the island of Kauai, we used to be without electricity at least 2 days a week. Incidentally, if any of you have been to the island of Kauai, it has never affected any of the tourist areas, trust me, okay? But they have the electricity go out so much so that all of us had these dual clocks that were electric with a wine clock beside it, so you could, compare them. But we today, unless you've ever been in a situation like that, have no concept of what it is for the sun to set in the ancient world. That when the sun set, it was black. And this whole thing of somehow realizing that God is the sun within our minds, within our ethics, within all these kinds, and when that sets, there's nothing. There's nothing. And so they will use this. But I think unless you've been in an area like that, even for a little while, this doesn't make a lot of sense. He says, it was you who fixed the bounds of the earth. You made both summer and winter. Remember this, O Lord, the enemy scoffed. A senseless people insulted your name. Do not give the soul of your dove to the beasts, nor forget the life of your poor ones forever. Okay? Now, this idea of give the soul of your dove, oftentimes Israel is symbolized by a dove, and you would find that more frequently in the Song of Songs, that they will talk about the dove, and there the dove represents Israel. And what's the soul of your dove? The thing is that Israel should be under, let's say, the Babylonians. I don't know whether they're talking here about the Babylonians, the Persians, or whoever. They went through several exiles. But the idea is that they should be under that long enough that they should lose what it is to be Israel. I mentioned to you, I think I mentioned this time, that if you are a strong practicing Jew, it is very difficult, let's say in California. It's probably easier in some other areas. It's very difficult in California to go out to dinner. And that's because of kosher laws. And to think you can't eat pork, that's just a little part of kosher laws. You also can never use any pot in which pork has been prepared for anything else, or any plate on which cheese has rested. Can you ever put meat? And in order to have a kosher restaurant, you have to have 2 kitchens and 2 rooms where the dishes are. If you go to Israel, you find out they're separate restaurants. Like it may be one restaurant, but the building is so divided. And little things, like if you go in and you eat meat, you can't put cream in your coffee. It's just, and when you begin to find these laws, they're just so complicated that if you haven't been raised with them, you don't know them. But in Israel, a Jew can walk into any restaurant in the entire country and just sit down and order what they want. There's no problem, because they're kosher restaurants. But if you're in California, again, some areas have really strong Jewish communities, but in California, I think there'd be precious few restaurants who could enter that way. And much like the Friday abstinence, if you haven't been raised with it, you don't understand it, okay? Like, I can't tell you how often when I was a youngster with my parents, people would invite us over for dinner and understand clearly that there is to be no meat. And then you go into a dinner and they're surprised to find out chicken is meat, okay? Or my absolute favorite, and I'm sure I've shared this with you 100 times, that we were invited to dinner, this family. They made a wonderful seafood meal that began with clam chowder. And I will never forget the look on my mother's face when in her spoonful of clam chowder, she found a piece of bacon the size of the head of a pin. She knew we were all on our way to hell and it was over, you know? But the thing is, if you haven't been raised with Friday abstinence, you don't understand that while you may make this wonderful stew, the chicken broth renders it meat, okay? It's just, but Judaism is like that. So they're saying, don't let us be under these people so long that we're incapable of restructuring Judaism. We don't want it because it's something that's really hard to be about. He says, look to the covenant. Each cave in the land is a place where violence makes its home. Do not let the oppressed be put to shame. Let the poor and the needy bless your name. Arise, O God, and defend your cause. Remember how the senseless revile you all day, and do not forget the clamor of your enemies, the unceasing uproar of those who defy you. And I'd like you to notice whenever this psalm is read in Jewish circles, whenever this psalm is read liturgically, the closing line always is, may the Lord be blessed forever. They don't allow a psalm when prayed to end badly, okay? So it has to end on an up note. And it just so happens that here they have trouble finding an up note, okay? So we'll leave this here and begin with 75, which hopefully is more cheerful. Thank you very much.